I'm Kelly Quiney, and this is Stepping Off the Path. Stories of women who stopped living by everyone else's rules and chose themselves instead. Because when your situation becomes intolerable, change isn't just an option, it's the only way forward. These are the stories of what happens next when women finally decide they've had enough and choose a different way forward. Because choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's the start of everything.
A note about this episode before we begin. We discuss trauma, complex PTSD, addiction and recovery, colonization and racism, grief and anger. Please listen with care and step away if needed. The conversation reflects personal experiences and opinions. It is not medical, psychological, or legal advice, and it is not a substitute for professional care. If you're struggling with substance use, trauma, or mental health, please seek support from a qualified person. If you are in immediate danger, please contact your local emergency services provider. Hey, it's Kelly, and welcome to Stepping Off the Path. Today's guest is Abby Teixeira, a woman-centered trauma recovery coach, author, speaker, and founder of the Reclaim and Rise movement. Abby's story is extraordinary. She grew up in an immigrant family shaped by war and trauma, became a high-functioning alcoholic while climbing the career ladder, and then faced a moment that changed everything. What followed was deep recovery, community healing, reclaiming her Indigenous roots, and breaking cycles as a mother of four. We talk about complex PTSD, relapse as a lesson and not a failure, grief, rage, and what it looks like to parent from a regulated nervous system. If you need proof that a different life is possible, this conversation is it. I'm incredibly excited and honored to be speaking with Abigail Teixeira, a woman who truly embodies what it means to step off the path and create a life of purpose, integrity, and impact. Abby is a woman-centered trauma recovery coach and female business mentor, a complex post-traumatic stress disorder advocate, speaker, 3 times best-selling author, mama to 4 beautiful children, and married to her soulmate. She has built a powerful online presence through her honesty and authenticity in sharing not just her story, but the ongoing journey of becoming. As a Latina woman, Abby brings a decolonized lens and inclusive values to everything she does, and recently founded the Reclaim and Rise movement, a sacred space to honor presence, stories, lineage, and voice, and so much more than I can do justice to in one sentence. These achievements are incredible and deeply inspiring, yet life looked very different 11 years ago. And today we'll explore how Abby found the courage to walk a new path. Abby, to begin, how do you describe who you are today in your own words?
Wow. Well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's always so surreal to hear somebody speak of you in such a way, especially your accolades and all that kind of stuff. But, quite simply, aside from everything that you mentioned, I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 4 beautiful little souls who chose me to be their mom, and I'm a proud cycle breaker. That I'm the one in the lineage to say no more, and that's probably one of the most uh, profound things for me. It's my why. It's the reason why I get up and I do the hard things, and when I want to give up, I just think of them. I really feel I have a second chance at life. Probably more than a second chance, but it truly feels like a true second chance here. And I'm here to do big things in the world, and it involves a variety of different things, but more than anything, really have learned to transmute and alchemize all the pain and the suffering and the horrible things that I experienced in my life. There was nothing that I could do to change that. There's no amount of questioning why me and why did this have to happen to me and all those kind of things. I've just really accepted the fact that it happened, to me, but it
Mm.
isn't me. It doesn't have to define me. And, that's what my life's mission has become, really turning my pain into purpose, and
Mm.
something that will not only just span my work, but my children and their children. I was actually on a panel last night, a panel talk, and I got to share on there about one of the quotes that really stands out to me and is just so powerful, and that really just encompasses who I am. Is, I've chosen to be to heal, be the one to heal in my family lineage, and as such, the gift in that is that I get to heal the 7 generations before me and the 7 generations after me, right?
Wow.
And how deep that is, right? And so that's who I am. Yeah.
I'm knocked off my feet, Abby, and you mentioned a few times this was your second chance. So, and you've alluded to it. So if you feel comfortable, can you take us back to your early years and what did life look and feel like for you when you were growing up?
Yeah. I'll definitely be very succinct with it because it is a long story, and I have spoken on it in depth on on YouTube and all of that kind of stuff. But really, I come from an immigrant family. My parents fled from Central America, this small country called El Salvador. They fled there in the 80s. There was a very violent, very vicious civil war that was happening there at the time, and my dad was a child soldier, so he actually became a soldier in that war when he was 14. And as a result, just from 14 till I think about when he left around 2021. So he had experienced, not to mention his own upbringing and his own traumatic, kind of what he endured, in his childhood and all that kind of stuff. And so he met my mom, and my mom and him got married, and then she got pregnant with me, and she knew that his life was very much in danger. And so she pleaded with him that, you need to get out of the military, and we need to flee. We need to go somewhere where it's going to be safe for us to have a family and all of that kind of stuff. And at the time, my aunt was living here in Canada, and so she sponsored us. And that Canada was taking in refugees from Central America and other places that there was a war happening at that time. And on the way here to Canada, so my mom was 17, my dad was 21 at the time, stopped over Mexico. My mom was, I think, around 8 months pregnant at the time, and so she was pretty close to due date. And there was some paperwork delays, and I ended up being born in Mexico. And that the whole story of my birth story is just a whole other thing. But my parents were immigrants there, in Mexico, and didn't know anyone or anything like that. And yeah, I was born not breathing, but eventually came to life. And basically the doctor handed me to my mom or to my dad. My mom had passed out from like a hemorrhage. Doctor passed me to my dad and was like, okay, where's my payment? And I gotta go, kind of thing, right? And so by some miracle, kind of came back, into life, and so did my mom. And then there was this young couple, in Mexico with this newborn baby, and needing to get paperwork and all that kind of stuff done. So that was the start of my life. So really set the tone for a lot of what was going to come. And so we moved to Canada, and I was around 6 months old at the time, so I basically have been born and raised here. And my parents went on with their lives, and my I had two sisters younger than me, and my dad very, very, very quickly turned to alcohol to really, really cope with the immense amount of trauma that he had been carrying from his,
Mm.
not only just the war, but like his life. His life, he didn't. I come from two lineages of just a lot of abuse, addiction, poverty, war. lots and lots of just really sadness, a lot of sadness on both lineages from survival, right? And when I really look back all the way back, because I've been doing a lot of like ancestral reconnection and all that kind of stuff, I recognize, that this was all stemming from colonization and what happened, in our homelands and all of that kind of stuff. But I digress if I go down that topic yet. So back to Canada, dad turned to, alcohol to kind of cope. And it was a very volatile upbringing for my sisters and I, unfortunately. We had to endure a lot of just abuse and chaos. Like that was just our normal. It was just a lot of chaos, a lot of dysfunction. It was very, very painful. And, my parents were in pure survival mode, especially my mom,
Mm.
and she couldn't really give me guidance and direction as to how to cope with what was my reality as a kid, growing up, to immigrant hardworking parents. They worked very, very hard to provide for us, multiple jobs at various times. And we definitely never went without food, shelter, clothing, that kind of a thing. But the the home life was just very, it was sad. It was very, very difficult. And so because of that, I ended up turning to drugs and alcohol when I was a teenager, 15 years old. And that
Mm.
led me down a path of addiction for a solid 15 years after that. And
Wow.
I entered into recovery 11 years ago this month. So
Yay.
that is the nutshell of growing up. But
Mm.
yeah, a lot of adversity, just a lot of trauma and a lot of yeah, darkness, a lot of
Mm.
darkness.
Mm. You were speaking, and I can hear what young kids your parents were.
Hmm.
You said what your dad came through, and then we sit here as, well, I'm 48, you're a ways off that, but imagining an 18-year-old woman leaving home and that journey,
Yeah.
that's pretty intense.
Mhm.
And you've mentioned for yourself being a Latina woman, what were some of the messages you received about who you needed to be, who you should be as a girl, as part of your family?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really great question. When I think, because I mentioned how I've really been diving deep into my roots and reconnecting with my roots and my ancestors and really looking down my lineages and all of that kind of stuff. And it's very eye-opening what has come through this kind of exploration that I've been on, this journey of exploration and rediscovery and reclamation. And, growing up, it was, we were very much the minorities, like my parents moved a lot. And so I went to so many different schools, and a lot of them were predominantly white. And, I stood out a lot. And, we were very much encouraged and forced to really assimilate, right? Like, my first language was Spanish, but as soon as I started going to school, I wanted to fit in, right? And so of course we learned English, and then we're bringing that home, and then eventually we're only speaking English, things like that. That just becomes very normal. Even to this day, like I speak to my parents in English and they speak back to me in Spanish. And so it's always kind of been this way. And so I understand it perfectly and I speak it, but I'm very, very self-conscious about it because it was almost like embarrassing to be different, growing up. Right. And so I would hide lots of parts of myself. I had to mask a lot. Um, and try my hardest not to stand out when I already knew that I did, and even culturally, a lot of in Latin cultures, skin color is a big thing. Like the lighter you are, the more blessed you are, the
Wow.
more desired you are. It runs like colonization runs very deep, very, very deep, and even within Latin communities and cultures, there's a lot of looking down upon other cultures who are very, very, very clearly indigenous, right, in roots, where they look more darker, they have the more indigenous traits and all of that kind of stuff. That's very undesirable. You do not want to be called indigenous. You don't want to be compared to one. It's like considered like a diss. Like it's like a lot of that. Those were a lot of the messages that I got growing up, right? And so, yeah, and so that has a lot to like, it really shapes and mold, what you believe in, like, what you believe beauty is, what you believe worth is, all of those kind of things, right? And so, um, it has kind of come to more full circle now where I'm now going back and reclaiming my indigeneity and, my ancestry and all of that stuff. And then because of that, I look back and I think about the memories, the times when I was bullied at school,
Yeah.
for having darker skin, for having a different last name, all sorts of things like that, right? I can remember being in fourth grade, and my parents, we were going to El Salvador that summer to visit family because my mom left everybody back home. So there was still all my grandma, like my aunts, uncles, cousins. We still had tons of family back home, and we still love going on our trips to like go and visit the family there. And I remember it was right before summer holiday, and I was like bragging at school about how excited I was. And then the mean girls kind of got wind of this, and they came and they were bashing me. Where are you going? And I was like, oh, I'm going to El Salvador. What's El Salvador? And just teasing and just being mean. And like, who are you going to see there? And I started naming some of my aunts and uncles in Spanish. They have very Spanish names and stuff. And they were making fun of the names, all that kind of stuff, right? And as a young child, 9 years old, I remember I just felt so ashamed and embarrassed, and at the same time sad because I didn't understand why they were being mean about this, right? And so those kind of prejudice, and then you learn to kind of have thick skin. Like I learned to have thick skin, through that and stuff. And then there were times when I went to schools when it was predominantly colored kids, right? And then I fit in well there, and we had a lot of fun and all of that kind of stuff, right? So racism and discrimination is definitely very alive and well still, even in this day and age,
Yeah.
where that we live in.
Yeah. I was
Hmm.
just thinking when you were saying then thick skin, I'm thinking armor, like wrought iron armor. But, you look at your kids and I think about my kids and we just want our kids to have fun and run around and just be who they are in their pure, beautiful selves. And it's really hard, right, to hear those things because can you imagine that for your children
Hmm.
to have to live like that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like that's
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
lot to contend with.
Absolutely. And I'm really grateful that my kids go to a very inclusive school. They honor other cultures, they learn about them, all of that kind of stuff, right? And that's something that as I'm learning a lot of these things and relearning and unlearning, I'm also taking my kids alongside with me. So
Yeah.
practices, ceremonies, rituals that I'm learning about that were from my ancestors or my lineage. I'm
Mm.
like starting to do them, and my kids are very curious, right? They're like, "What are you doing, mom? What is that? What is this?" And like I explain to them, right? And so
Mm.
I'm explaining what I'm learning to them, to the point where now if they see me setting up, for example, one of the things I do is like a smudging, right? Where we like light up different herbs and to like cleanse, basically, to
Mm.
cleanse
Mm.
and like energetically purify and cleanse. And it's also a really great way to like kind of connect with ancestors, with spirits and things like that. And
Mm.
so I'll explain that to them. And like
Mm.
if they see me setting up to do that, they come and they're like, we want to do it, we want to smudge, and they do it, and it's just so beautiful and like heartwarming, right? Because then they're teaching other kids too, right? Like
Yeah.
that if it comes up and all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, and that's the thing about when you're the cycle breaker in the family and you're parenting, like what I have learned is that I'm not only just parenting my children, but I'm actually reparenting myself,
Yeah.
right, at the same time. Because there's a little girl inside of me that never got to experience a lot of the things that I'm now experiencing with my kids,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of like grief with that, with joy at the same time. It's that
Mhm.
whole kind of polarity of the both, where
Yeah.
the paradox that it's so heartbreaking, but at the same time so joyful to get to teach my children these things, to be proud of their indigeneity, to be proud of their roots,
Mm.
all of that kind of stuff. That to me was like more so suppressed. It was very suppressed, it very like um even my mom now, like in this day and age, because she's like, obviously I share about the things that I've been learning about and about our lineage and all that kind of stuff. And like for her, you can see it's very uncomfortable for her when I like start like really claiming, our indigenous roots and
Yeah.
stuff because they're very much conditioned to look down upon, the indigenous cultures and the people of the
Mm.
land and all that kind of stuff. They're kind of considered the lowest of the low kind of thing, right? And it's really, really sad, to see that. And I'll call her out on it nowadays. Like I'll just be like, "Mom, that's the colonizer speaking through you." Like, you know.
It's so strong. It's so
Yeah,
strong. I
yeah.
love the way you explain that because it's like we go from Abby, who's an excited kid, I'm going to El Salvador explaining and getting this bullying and
Hmm.
discrimination to the absolute joy in your voice and me looking at you when you're explaining, coming home to your indigenous roots. It's
Hmm.
absolutely beautiful to see, and hear, and that your kids get to go along with you and
Yeah,
educate those around them. So they get to go to school and excitedly tell their friends. And because they're in an inclusive environment, they get a warm reception,
yeah.
you know?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the work of cycle breaking, right? Is that I'm creating new patterns in our home, new even rites of passage, if you will, that I
Mm.
never got to go through with them. And it's really a beautiful thing, but it's also very like I said, it's a very real thing to experience both grief and joy and excitement at the same time.
Mm, mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you've explained so much there of your home life and actually the living with the pressure of colonization. Um, how do you see the impact of some of that early trauma on the choices that you made later in life?
Mhm. I had everything. It shaped everything. It shaped who I became, who I was, what I thought about myself, what I thought about the world, all of that kind of stuff. Because when I started, I had depression from a very young age. Like I remember 9 years old. I talk about this a lot. Where at 9 years old, I can remember very vividly telling my mom, like, "Mom, why do I always feel so sad?" You know, and she would just look at me, and like now being a mom, and like
Mhm.
putting myself in her shoes, what was happening in her world. I can see that at the time when I would ask her these kind of things, she was deeply dissociated. She was in very much into her own survival mode, right?
Mm.
And so like what like she didn't even have the oxygen mask on her to be able to give it to me, right? And so she would just tell me what she knew to be true for her. So she'd be like, just don't think about it. If you don't think about it, it'll just kind of go away. And it was so dissatisfying for me to hear that answer because it was like, Mom, if all I needed to do was not think about it, do you not think that I would have done that by now? And so, for me, it was from a very young age. It was all about survival. It's about what can I do? How can I live in a way and live and breathe and move in a way that I'm going to be safe, that I'm
Yeah.
not going to be in trouble, that I'm not going to be have an explosive kind of situation with my dad, those kind of things. Right. So it was
Mm.
all about survival. And that whole my nervous system was wired for fight and flight at all times. Right. And that's like the condition, that I have. I'm a complex PTSD survivor. Right. And so complex trauma is from repeated incidents of trauma and abuse, where there's no escape. There's no escape, right? And
Yeah.
so, and what that does to a person's like brain, feelings, emotions, all of that kind of stuff, right? So it really, really shaped me to really be um, in survival, right? And so at 15, when drugs and alcohol came to the picture, it was just numbing. Then it was just like suppressing and numbing, right? Not dealing with anything, just suppressing and just floating through life, not really conscious, but like you're there in physical form, but you're not actually there, right? And
Mm.
so um it wasn't until I went into healing and recovery, like I mentioned 11 years ago, where I started to discover who actually am I underneath the trauma, underneath all the beliefs and all the experiences and all of that kind of stuff. And that's what this whole past 11 years has been this learning of who I actually am. What are the things that I find joy in? What are the things that move me to tears? What are the things I'm passionate about? All of those kind of things, right? But
Mm.
it wasn't until I got rid of the substances that was keeping me in a fog and numb that I was able to actually inquire and have that kind of a journey, because childhood and teen years was survival for me.
Mm. Mm. And you've really explained really well. And as someone who's experienced similar, I very much understand the self-medicating, right? Another term they'd call it. But you don't realize at the time, right? You're just doing it to feel well, to not feel, I would say. Um, but when do you think, can you think of a point where the alcohol and the drugs, like it keeps you going for a while, but when it started to take things away from you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For sure. So the kind of the I guess the moment that kind of changed everything for me, those 11 years ago, was that I actually ended up in jail for it wasn't my first time. It was
Hmm.
the second time for me.
Yeah.
But it was my last up until, today.
Yeah.
And, you know, leading to that moment, um, there was a lot that was really starting to unravel in my life. I was very, very much a functional drinker, because I finished high school. I went to university. I got my nursing degree. I did amazing in at work. I kept, kind of rising in the ranks, eventually became a manager, all of that kind of stuff on the outside, right?
Mm,
Got married, found the love of my life. We had a beautiful wedding. Everything you can imagine was picture perfect, considering what my life had been, growing up and all of that kind of stuff.
mm,
And, you know, then it was just about like hiding the addiction. And it was at first it was just part of like the party scene. Young people, it's not abnormal to go out every single weekend,
no.
overdrink, have fun, blackout, all of that kind of stuff. It was very, very much accepted, socially accepted. I never considered I had a problem. I
Mm,
knew I drank heavily. That was like it was a fact. Everyone who was around me would know that, right? And in a way, I kind of knew that I used it as medication, like you mentioned, self-medicate, but I nowhere near was it in my conscious to like think that it was a problem and that I needed help for it kind of thing, right? And so they talk about how in addiction it leads us to one of three places, which is institution, jail, or death. And at that point in time, I had already tasted all of those scenarios in my life, and there's a lot of yets. So they say that like when you enter into recovery, there's a lot of yets. Like some people come in with a lot of yets, which means, I haven't lost my job yet. I haven't lost my car yet. I haven't lost my relationship yet, but those
right.
are all things that eventually you end up losing when you consistently pick the addiction over everything else, right? Which is very, very common that happens to addicts, right? And so
Mm,
up until that point, I had kind of kept it together. But for me, the biggest thing was just the mental health aspect of it, the deep, deep, dark depression that I was navigating at that time. I would go to work all day and I would come home and immediately I knew I had, like alcohol in my freezer, and I would pull it out and I would drink until I blacked out. And I did that almost every single night.
right.
And when you do that in a consistent, like pace, it's so depressing. So
Mm,
depressing. I would wake up just dreading being up. Like it was just a really, really toxic, really, really, really sad kind of life.
mm,
And I can remember the week before I ended up in the jail situation for the second time. I remember waking up and it was after a weekend vendor kind of thing. And I just laid there and thought to myself, like, if only one day I wouldn't have to wake up and feel like this anymore. That was the first
mm,
time that I can clearly remember really, really feeling that, right? Like really, really feeling that. And I was like, and I hadn't prayed or anything like that to like, anything bigger than me for a very long time. And in that moment I did, I prayed and I said, like whatever is out there, I need help. I need help. Right. And so then a week later is when I ended up getting an impaired driving charge for drinking and driving, basically. And that was like the answer, to my prayer, even though it didn't come in a way that I would have hoped.
yeah,
I took it as an answer, right? So it was really, for me, it was a wake up call. It
yeah,
was a last chance. Like I knew that I was playing with fire in the lifestyle that I was living. And I knew that next time maybe I wouldn't be so lucky. I
yeah,
would have either hurt somebody or hurt myself, to a point where I can't come back from it. So I knew deep in my soul in that moment that I was playing with fire, and I knew that this was kind of the it, right? And so
Mm.
then that's what really led me to that decision.
Yeah. I think something that was really interesting, that there was a couple of things I heard, and I get this as well. Um, when you grow up in that sort of environment where you're hyper vigilant,
Hmm.
you often become a people pleaser.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and you manage to graduate high school, go to college, hold down a really good job, and be an alcoholic, right?
Hmm.
So it's easy to have this idea of a homeless, vagrant
Yeah.
person, but you were really functioning, like
Yeah.
really functioning. And thank God that you had that moment where you were arrested and you woke up
Hmm.
in the jail cell. Was it that moment? Like, did you stop drinking from
No.
the point on? No.
No, interestingly enough. So that happened in June, and my sober date is October. So
Okay.
there's obviously a story in between that, because yeah, that was the decision. That was the awareness. I would call it more so the awareness, where I finally was fully aware that this was a problem
Mm.
and that I needed help. I couldn't do this by myself. Like and at the time I also didn't know what this was going to look like, what it was going to take, nothing like that. There was no role
Um,
models that I had to look up at and say, wow, like this person really has my story and like look what they did kind of thing. There was no blueprint, path, anything. I just knew I was aware that this was a problem and that I needed help, and therefore I was going to do whatever it took, to kind
yeah.
of to get that help. Um yeah, and it was just like, and that's really the key for me for my success was truly the willingness that I was committed to. Because again,
Mhm.
I didn't know what this was going to look like. I didn't know that, healing meant or quitting drinking was just the start. It was actually probably the easiest part,
Yeah.
to get rid of that. Because what came after, that was the real work.
Yeah.
When you take away the substances and then you're left with me, myself, and I, and all the stuff that I've been running away from starts coming
Mhm.
up, right?
Mhm.
That's when I really had to surrender and get help with who can help me, navigate this craziness that was starting
Mhm.
to happen, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so yeah, the decision to stop drinking was the decision. And then um I had several trips planned at the time because, like I mentioned, I still had a very much functional life, or like a double life that I lived, you know. And I had several trips with a bunch of friends, and I went on those trips and very much in a zombie mode. Like I was very much there in physical form, but I was not there spiritually, emotionally. Like I knew there was this loomingness that
Mhm.
my life was about to change,
Yeah.
right? And really significantly. And so this was my last hurrah kind of thing. And, went traveling and came back. And that's when I really like dug into looking for supports and resources and things like that. And that was a really big journey to learn about, what is out there that could
Mhm.
help someone like me, and all of that kind of stuff. And then I had a relapse journey. So I ended up quitting drinking like officially in July, and
Mhm.
I made it to almost I think it was, yeah, almost 2 months. And then I relapsed, but I definitely needed that relapse as a confirmation, just about if I had any sort of doubts in my mind up until that point that I had any control over this and that I could get a handle of it on my own.
Mhm.
This was the confirmation that I once again just needed, that it was like, okay, it's official,
Yeah.
and that was the date in October.
Which how refreshing to hear, because I've heard of people having relapse and that's it. They're gone again
Mhm,
for
mhm.
a few years. So powerful that that reinforces, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And so your recovery, I'm really interested in the role that culture, community, or spirituality played in your recovery. So how did that go for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's very layered and nuanced because it keeps changing and evolving for me. Um, but early on, one of the greatest ways and one of the most profound ways that I was able to find healing was in community, was really, and one scenario in particular that really stands out for me that planted a massive seed for me into what the work I do now, And so this was 11 years ago, like I mentioned, and I ended up finding this support group that was for adults who are survivors of childhood trauma. And so it was very specific, very specific. And so I joined it. There was a rigorous intake process to make sure that this is the right people in this kind of group, because obviously very, very sensitive subject.
Mm.
These are survivors, right, from all different levels of healing, past, all sorts of things, right? And so I ended up luckily, yeah, being invited to join this support circle, and it was one of the most profound. I still have a journal of it actually, and it's one of my most treasured, prized possessions. Because I'm a big, big writer, and
Mm.
after these sessions, I would come home and I would journal about them and like what I was feeling and what was coming up for me, all of that kind of stuff. So every once in a while, I like to go back in there and read some of those entries because they're just so surreal to look at,
Mm.
from now being in the future. But that was one of the best ways because for me and for many survivors, one of the key things that we kind of battle with all the time is just deep isolation and loneliness, thinking that we are the only ones, that nobody could ever understand what we've been through, that a lot of my story is unspeakable, no one can even hear about it, all of those kind of things, right? And that is a very heavy weight to carry,
Yeah.
very, very heavy burden to carry, especially as a child, when you're
Mm.
literally feeling like you're carrying this dark cloud with you everywhere you go, that you can't share with anyone or anything like that. And so sitting in circle and hearing, survivor after survivor, and it wasn't like it was a trauma dump kind of situation. We were there, and to be honest, we didn't even get to hear details about our individual experiences. It was more raising awareness to how that's affected us now as grown
Mm.
adults and that has manifested in our lives. And there were people in that circle who had incredibly difficult lives. Like it was so eye-opening. And I just remember thinking that heavy burden that I had been carrying for all of my life, it got a little bit lighter and it got a little bit looser. And
Mm.
then more than anything, what was more powerful, the most powerful thing about this circle and any type of healing and circle and community is that when you speak out the things that you felt one day that were unspeakable, they live in shame and secrecy. And the minute that you bring light to it and you're able to speak about it, that shame and secrecy dissipates, right?
Mm.
Because you brought it now to the light. And what actually comes through that is actually freedom. It comes, freedom and liberation, knowing that first of all, you're not the only one, you know second of all, like there's actually others who have experienced similar things as you, and by you naming this, you give others the opportunity to be able to finally see themselves in someone, right? And then that whole like I'm alone kind of thing really, really dissipates. And so that
Mm.
was really, really powerful for me to experience, and it was a big, big way that I've healed in through the spirit of community,
Yeah.
right? And, aside from that, my whole spiritual journey about higher power, all of that kind of stuff, that in itself could be a anthology or like write
Mm.
about. But I have always been a deeply spiritual person. I have encountered, kind of religious abuse, and that's, like I said, it's a tale for another time. But,
Mm.
I'm at a place now where yeah, it's just a really, really beautiful place of understanding, kind of my place in the world, who's around me, like how I'm protected, all of that kind of stuff, and just really learning to reconnect with my intuition, my self-trust, all of that kind of stuff. It's been really, really beautiful.
Mm. I think you really shone a light on something there. When I was a parent coach and I was with groups of women, I would often say to them, shame breeds in silence. And we weren't discussing childhood abuse, but more the shame of saying and doing things as a mum they didn't want to. There's so much power in not feeling alone. And do you think also, along with recovery, do you think there need to be more practices which honor Indigenous and cultural healing practices in recovery? And what do you think that could look like?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think universally, not just in recovery,
Mm,
that the indigenous ways of knowing and doing, were simple but profound. And there was one of the key kind of parasites of like colonization is the individualization of everything, that it's every man for yourself, that you are different from everyone else. That's why all of these kind of things exist, like racism, like classism, ableism, all that kind of stuff, like categorizing people against each other. Whereas like in indigenous ways of knowing and practicing, everything was done in community, right? There was no one man for yourself, like everyone gathered together, and something so simple as having gatherings, of whether it's if you only want to focus on women and femmes or men gathering together, like
mm,
once again to like speak, to story tell, to share wisdom with each other, to hold space, like all of that kind of stuff. There's something so profound and healing about just even something so simple as that.
mm,
That's a lot of the work that I've now started to incorporate into my own work, right? Because I've seen the power of it, I've experienced the power of it myself, and now I'm able to facilitate that myself with the women that I work with as well, and be able to like hold space, and I get to witness it in live action, the power that
yeah,
this has, right? And how beautiful it is, and how healing it is.
mm,
Like even grief, like so many, like there's not a single human being on the planet that hasn't experienced grief.
yeah,
And unfortunately, in a lot of Western cultures, grief is something that has an expiration date. You get 1 or 2 days of bereavement leave when somebody passes away. Like, let's say,
mm,
for example, if we're speaking about losing somebody in the physical realm as grief, which is the common thing that people think about. But grief can come in so many different ways: losing a job, losing a relationship, kids moving out of the house, like all those kind of things. Like there's grief to that, and so many of us carry that grief in silence, in isolation, and in shame, because it's like I
mm,
should be over this by now. Like why is this still triggering me? This is why is it bothering me, right? And nobody ever speaks about it, and so all these people are walking around carrying all this shame and grief and sadness, nowhere to go, kind of thing, right? And so
mm,
when we come together and we're able to sit in circle, we're able to sit in community, and it's a safe, supportive environment, you know, um, it's beautiful to let go of that,
yeah,
just by simply sharing it, the realities. And even
mm,
if you're not the one sharing, maybe seeing somebody else speak of your experience, a similar experience, and knowing once again that you're not the only one, right? And so that's one that kind of really is at the forefront for me, because it's something that I'm currently doing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I love that when you share, you're so open about, well, this is a journey that I'm still on. And it's brilliant hearing about what helped you get through recovery. And I'm curious, when did you have any ideas about parenting? Because personally, I was adamant I was never going to have children because I didn't want to mess them up. And
Mm,
I'm curious, how long after maybe you got sober was there an idea, or what your thoughts on parenthood
yeah.
were?
Yeah, I love talking about this, because parenting has also been, yeah, one of the greatest teachers of my life, being a mom. And similar to you, I didn't want to be a mom. It wasn't ever anything that I thought about, dreamt about. I was never the little girl that, was like, one day I'm going to be a mom. Like, never. Like, that was not me. And it was because, realistically thinking, now I realize it was because I just had no relatability to kids. I
Yeah.
never really was around them. I couldn't really relate to the childhood experience as in the way that it's supposed to be, with like joy and laughter and carelessness and carefree and all of that kind of stuff, right? And my husband and I, when we got together, of course, when things are getting serious, you have that discussion. And
Yeah.
we had that discussion about starting a family and all of that kind of stuff. And he was very like adamant that, that was something that was a big dream for him, right? To start a family. And I was open to it, but it was nothing that I was leaping towards, like, but I was open to it. I was like, okay, I hear you. I'm like, I'd be open to it. I'm not shutting down, kind of thing, right? And at the time, I was in my early 20s. I was 23 at the time when we
Mhm.
met. And so, I was young, and like it was the furthest thing from my, like world I could imagine, and, so we got married, and, long story short, we actually waited 10 years before we had kids. And
Wow.
so, over a whole bunch of different things, like me entering into recovery and my healing journey, all of that, that really took precedence in my life, where it was just the number one priority for me. And then, year after year, we would kind of have a conversation like, is this our year? And it was like every year I'd always be like, delay, delay, delay. and, and then eventually one day, like I always say that you're never ready for motherhood,
Oh,
but there's a time when that, that you can do it. Like, it's like, okay, like, you're just kind of
yeah.
like, I felt like, okay, I'm open to it now. Like, and so, yeah, so 10 years into our relationship, we started having our babies. And so we had them back to back. And
Whoa.
and so when we had them, I thought to myself, like, we had a really solid foundation in our relationship, in our marriage. We had already been together for 10 years. I had gone through healing and recovery, all of that kind of stuff. And so definitely was beneficial for me to have that foundation, because I had already done hard things, and I had already kind of been growing my muscle of asking for help and support, all of that kind of stuff. So interestingly enough, have my daughter, uh, have birth trauma with her. She ended up in the NICU for 2 weeks, and
Mm,
had a really, really just unexpected first mom kind of journey with her, and all of that kind of stuff. Ended up having postpartum depression,
mm.
and navigated that with my first two pregnancies.
Wow.
And, when they're babies, like, yes, it's hard, but it's like it's manageable in the sense, because it's very straightforward. Like, they just need to
Yeah.
eat, sleep, and you need to keep them clean, right?
Yeah.
But once they're starting to evolve into their own little beings, that's when the fun really began for me. So, like once they enter the toddler years, and they have the big emotions and the feelings, and they start talking back and talking to you and all of that kind of stuff, that hit me like a train. Like,
Yeah.
it really did,
Yeah.
because suddenly I was experiencing um it, like, almost like an out of body experience, like they would react in very normal childhood ways, but for me it was like not safe, right? Like when I would experience them reacting in a way that wasn't safe for me was incredibly triggering for me. And I would have these automatic responses or reactions. I'm not even going to say responses. They would be these automatic reactions that were scary to me, right? They came from the subconscious for sure, of like how
Mm.
I was raised and all of that kind of stuff. And so that began one of the most intensive and ongoing journeys of my life, which is, like I said, the cycle breaking, the parenting, and the reparenting. I don't know if you can hear
Yeah.
them in the
This is the reality of being a parent. I think what I was surprised by, I agree with everything you said, but the level of rage that came out in me, and because my little Kelly was going, well, hang on, I didn't get any of that. Why do they? And that was really shocking to me, because it is a very young response, right? And I that really knocked me sideways, and to even admit that, because it sounds ridiculous. I was like, I can't even believe I'm saying this out. It sounds ridiculous. But she was annoyed. She, this wasn't okay. I didn't get this. Why do they get that? And I wonder if it sounds like you experienced similar.
Yeah. Rage and anger is definitely one of these things that, even in my work, like, with clients and things like that, like, and I'm sure you can also attest to this, that whenever anger or rage kind of comes up, it's almost like a taboo kind of topic, right? There's a lot of shame around it.
Oh yeah.
Because many of us, trauma or not, traumatic childhoods or not, there's not a lot of us that were taught emotional maturity. There's not a lot of us that were taught how to process healthy emotions. And anger is one of those things it's a healthy emotion.
Mm.
And my son, my oldest son, he's 5 now. And I always like to talk about him specifically because he's one of my greatest teachers as well. Very, very intense, very, very, he feels deeply, this kid, like just
Mm.
very raw in his expression. And his favorite emotion is anger. And one of my friends was like, I love that his favorite emotion is anger. Like, I know. I'm like, isn't it awesome? Like, and I talked to him. So this is okay, I'll share prior and then now, because
Yeah.
early on when he started to kind of really express himself, like he goes from 0 to 100 very quickly. Like if he feels that somebody was unfair to him or just like any sort kind of situation that really rattles him, he
Mm.
just gets angry, like immediately, and like angry. And in the early time days when he was like 2, 3, he would throw things and stuff like that, right? And so incredibly triggering for me to experience that,
Mm.
as someone who I was never allowed to like act like that around my parents. Like, are you kidding me? I could never be like have rage or have a tantrum or any of that stuff, right? And so super, super triggering for me and so that I had to really, really work hard to rewire that pattern of like reacting in a way that would shut him down. Cause that's what the way that I was taught is that you need to just shut it down. Right. And so, yeah, like on the outside, it looks like a kid is maybe behaving, but what's really happened is that that kid has actually shut down. Right. And so therefore they're just like, yeah, like it's just like almost like a dissociation almost that happens. And sometimes that did happen. Right. And so
Mm.
really interesting to start to learn about that and then start to explore my own rage and anger, right? And that's something that had been so suppressed because when you were sharing about your inner little Kelly, I have a little Abby, and she gets very angry sometimes too. It's like, how dare you do this when like I was not allowed to do that,
Oh yeah.
like, or I never got to do this and like all these kind of things, right? And sometimes instead of suppressing her, I've had to learn how to process it in a healthy way,
Mm.
like in a way, whether it's driving in my van with my kids are not there, windows down and I like scream, like I have like a scream fest, and
Yeah.
that eventually turns to crying, like things
Yeah.
like that. Cause it has to go somewhere. It
Yeah.
has to go somewhere instead of it being bottled up all the time and then exploding in these situations, where it's like so delicate and sensitive and like the littlest thing will make you kind of blow up, right? And so very, very interesting to learn as we go. Right? And to be able to yeah, hold space for ourselves so that we can learn to hold space for our kids when they are also having hard times, and hard feelings and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And what a
Mhm.
gift you are giving them by parenting yourself again, learning to process your emotions, not react. I totally get that. I really like that you said that, react, because mine was literally a naught to, you
Yeah.
know, explosion. And I just love this journey. And I'm thinking, now sat here, Abby sat here, kids, husband, the journey that you're on. Did you ever imagine that that was possible?
No, no, no. And you hear it all the time and it kind of sounds cheesy, but for real. If someone had told me, 11 years ago that this is what my life would look like today, I could never imagine it.
Mm,
I could like to be a mom of four, you
yeah,
know, to be in recovery, alcohol free for 11 years, like to become a coach, to be a speaker, all of those kind of things. Like me, what me?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so no, I when like again when I made that decision 11 years ago, I truly knew it was a live or die kind of decision, that it
yeah.
was like, I either do this or I die. So that was my motivation, is if I don't do this, I could die. And what could happen to the people that love me and what kind of legacy would I leave behind? And I'm now in the place where I did not go through all of that to play small
Yeah.
anymore. And that's why I hold on to that second chance kind of thing, right? Where it's like,
Mm,
like I love this quote and I've shared it multiple times because it really resonates with me. But like literally, I did not crawl through the shards of my brokenness to like
mm,
play small,
yeah.
right? And so that's why I'm so convicted and so excited about where my life is, the possibilities, that have opened up for me, and more than anything, the impact that this creates, the ripple effects that by me continuously showing up and stepping up and all of that kind of stuff, what that creates for other people,
Mm,
right? Because like I mentioned during our conversation at one point, I didn't have role models. I didn't have other women that I could look at and say like, I like that's somebody like me, And so now I've become, not only have I become my own role model, but now
Mm.
I can also be a role model to others
Yeah.
who constantly fill my DMs, constantly message me, to share with me their Me Too stories, right? That it's like, oh my goodness, you spoke, like you put words to an experience that I also had, and all of that kind of stuff, right? And I
Mm.
could have a whole episode, talking about all the amazing things that have happened
Yeah.
because of the choices that I've made and how it's affected other women, right? It's just a
Yeah.
really, really beautiful journey.
Yeah. And that's what
Yeah.
I think. Like I'm thinking about the woman back then. So I could say as an example for myself, I would wake up after having had a blackout drunk session. I had shivers going through me, nausea not far, like an
Mm,
axe was in my head, but that was dwarfed by the anxiety, the shame, the what did I do last night? And I'm wondering, for a woman who's there, what would you say is the next smallest step that she could take?
yeah. I think it might seem simple, but I know for me it was the acknowledgement that this was a problem.
Yeah,
Because again, you can't heal what you don't acknowledge,
yeah,
right? And if you are in yeah, like if you're just so wrapped in the shame and the isolation around it and the denial, right? And yeah, it's about really acknowledging that maybe this is a problem that I need to take a look at,
yeah,
right? And then followed immediately after by seeking support, seeking resources, seeking somebody that can help you through this, right?
yeah.
Because our same brain that got us into that problem is not going to get us out, right?
No.
And the big thing, because like I've been there, I will always remember how I felt those 11 years ago when I woke up with all this paperwork beside me, and like what did I do, like
Mm,
not this again kind of thing, right? And how hopeless I felt, and then also how hopeless I felt in my relapse journey. And a piece that I actually forgot to mention in that story that was super super monumental was that the day that the night that I relapsed, the next morning, I woke up and I was like, "Oh, that's it. This is never gonna work for me. I'm hopeless. Like, see, like what a screw up I am." All these kind of things
mm,
started coming up, right? And I was just devastated beside myself.
yeah,
And somebody reached out to me that day, actually. And they called me. Like I call her an angel, actually.
yeah,
And she's actually one of my really, really good friends now, 11 years later. Very, very dear sister in recovery for me. She called me the next day and she was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is what happened." And I was like crying and sobbing and telling her, and I was like, "I'm a failure. This is never going to work for me," and
wow,
all this stuff, right? And she held space. And then afterwards, like when I was done, she was like, "Listen," she's like, "This is only a failure if you don't learn from it."
yeah,
Like this can be a lesson if you learn from it. And this is, and I took that principle that she shared with me to everything I do now,
mm,
where any time that I think that I've hit a failure, it's actually a lesson because I'm going to learn from it. I
yeah,
am going to learn and grow from it so that I don't do it again, or I can actually help somebody else avoid that and all that kind of stuff, right? And so
yeah,
I would say to somebody, "You're not a failure. This is a really big initiation and a lesson that
mm,
you can take into your life, and that I can promise you that we do heal, we do recover, and yeah, you can get better. It's
mm.
not alone."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that really feeds beautifully into the work that you've done recently, the Reclaim and Rise movement, and how that came about and where you want to go with it.
Yeah. Um, so I had the idea a few months ago that because like I said, like I've been on this kind of journey of like reclamation and um learning and all of that kind of stuff. And once you start, and like decolonization and all that kind of stuff, and I always say that once you start to see things, you can't unsee it. And
Hmm.
so I started to really, really see how, decolonization was seeped into everything, and, or like colonization was seeped into everything. And just around the patriarchy and white supremacy and all that kind of stuff, it just
Mm,
gets in your face. And I started to notice that, in a lot of the rooms that I was in, I was always, the minority. I was always, kind of the only kind of colored person, colored
mm,
woman. And I was like, why is that? I started getting so curious, right? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that exists. Cultural barriers, financial barriers,
Mm,
all sorts of things, right? Opportunity, privilege, all of that kind of stuff. So for me, it felt really important to start to amplify and, really bring out of the weeds, like all these incredible women of color who
mm,
have gifts, who have a message, who have a story to tell, who have, like they have potent medicine in their own right to give to the world, right?
yeah.
And so that's really become a passion for me to be able to work with, women of the global majority.
Mm,
And these are coaches, they're healers, they're mothers, and so I created this space called Reclaim and Rise, and it was a free monthly gathering, and I had women sign up and come in, and every month was a different topic.
mm,
So we covered things like grief, money, we covered visibility, right? And
mm,
so I would do a little teaching and then open it up for conversation. And the conversation, that's what I mean, the circle, right? When you open the circle and everyone starts sharing,
yeah.
that's where the magic really is. And it's been really, really beautiful to build a community in that way.
Mm. And will you do more of that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
I started it off as a 3 month thing. So it was just a 3-part series. Now we're in integration mode for myself as we're in the fall. Um, and so I'm in integration mode right now, and I'll be relaunching another 3-part series in the new year. So I'm really excited for that, just because it was just it filled up my heart and my cup, and it also was so beautiful for other women to be able to show up in this way, to be
Mm,
supported in their shares and in circle, and to gather wisdom and healing, through that.
yeah. It's amazing, and I have looked at it and seen the reviews that you've had from the people who've attended. And it certainly seems like you're going to have a lot of people interested in the next intake. So, so apart from that, Abby, like, what do you think is possible for you now from here onwards?
Yeah, I think you know, anything is possible. Anything is possible, but the things that I'm most really committed to right now and really excited is, continuing on with my own personal visibility, my own personal journey of reclamation, continuing to speak out about my experiences, I'm very, very much for speaking from the scar, not the wound, right? And so
Mhm.
I know you and I both love human design, and that's something that has really changed my life as well.
Mm,
And, bringing that work, weaving it into my own work and bringing it out into the world has also been really, really important. Um, so I think, yeah, and then raising my children, raising my 4 babies to
yeah,
become their own, healers, their own incredible humans in the world, and the ripple effects that that creates, is amazing. I used to have a saying that kind of like a mission statement for myself that, I'm really here to help heal family lineages one mama at a time,
yeah,
right? And I truly believe in that because, we are, as mothers, we are the nervous system of our household,
yeah,
right? And if our nervous system is in a state of calm, of joy, then our family is. Right.
mm,
And that we can't get that way unless we actually, again, put the oxygen mask on ourselves first,
yeah,
be able to fill ourselves, to be able to know, know and love ourselves so deeply that we take care of ourselves in a way that we come out and it's overflowing, right, in abundance. And so,
yeah.
being able to pass that down is a big honor for me, and I see that as being big, really possible.
Mm, mm. The
Hmm.
intergenerational impact of that is massive, and I think hearing your story today and your journey has been amazing, and I am incredibly thankful for having had the chance to be able to speak to you. You're so inspirational, Abby, and I think wherever you are in your stage of journey, recovery, life, you're going to get something if you listen to what Abby shares. And on that, where can our listeners find you, Abby?
Yeah, absolutely. I love social media. I have a love-hate relationship, but I love social media. And my main place is Instagram. My handle is uh.vee. So, like, just add me and DM me. I'd love to meet you in that way. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook, as Abigail Teixeira, and I'm sure you'll have that linked in the show notes.
I will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you again, Abby. It's been wonderful to speak to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Stepping Off the Path. If Abby's story resonated, please share this episode with a woman who needs some hope today. You'll find Abby on Instagram and Facebook, and I've linked her Reclaim and Rise gatherings in the show notes. If you're standing at your own crossroads, please reach out and book a Clarity Blueprint call with me. Let's map your next move with clarity and confidence. And if this episode helped, please follow, rate, and review the show. It makes a huge difference. See you next time.